guys. Hi guys. Hey guys. Hey.
This is not your average podcast, trust me. This is IP series, where you learn to protect and safeguard all your intellectual property so you can make a career of what you love. Join me, Rita and Richinda, as we discuss all things intellectual property from the world of fashion, film, media, entertainment, dispute resolution, and even technology. Welcome.
Hi, Takunda. Welcome to IP Series podcast. Could you kindly introduce yourself to our listeners? Let us know what you do, and then we'll just delve into the conversation for today.
Sure. Hi, Rita. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi.
My name is Takunda Eron Chimutashu. I am professionally known as Zen Isa. I'm a Zimbabwean filmmaker. I'm a creative strategist. I'm an author. And I do work in the film industry that focuses on African stories, on building sustainable creative ecosystems on the continent, and on establishing and publishing different African cultures' identities through the medium of film.
Wow, very, very inspiring profile. Very inspiring profile. So I'm just going to delve into our conversation, which is like one of the reasons why I reached out to you. So there's this conversation that's going on in Nigeria. There's been like, conversation as to royalty residuals, right? So the old actors are demanding to be paid for works done prior to, the digital era. Now, how would you as a filmmaker, based on your experience, what would you say or advise actors and filmmakers in terms of negotiating how revenues, commissions, and payments should be made? And what has changed pre the 2000s and post the digital streaming era when it comes to conversation as to, getting paid for your work that you've done prior to now?
Well, quite a few things have changed. I think the best place to start is at how things are right now. At the moment, in a lot of film industries, actors get paid either an upfront payment in order to do work, or they're paid a deferred payment. So they're promised payment prior to the film being made. They make the film is sold, say to a streamer or a channel, and then they get paid. Some actors are still getting paid based off of commissioned work, like on long-running TV shows. So they'll be salaried, basically, and they can get a raise and so on and so forth, like any other regular job. The conversation around royalties has really come up because people have discovered that despite their contribution to a project being quite significant, they don't get to benefit from the continued growth of a project, because a film isn't just an asset that just shows up and it sits. Films continuously generate revenue over and over. And if you're an actor, they're using your likeness to generate that revenue over and over. If you're a director, it's your ideas. It's as a writer, it's the things that you've written. So a lot of filmmakers want to get involved in the full life cycle of a film's financial life, instead of just this upfront payment based on estimations or ideas presented by producers or commissioners or streamers of the film's value. I think a fairly good summation. When it comes to like historical films, things that have happened in the past, I'm not going to pretend like I'm like a full-on expert, but what I am seeing is a lot of dissatisfaction with the state of actors who we grew up watching on television, but then now we find out they're still broke. Their films have been run and rerun on television so many times, and we grew up on them, but these people didn't get a proper financial benefit from that. So we're seeing the results of the industry we still have, and we want to avoid those by creating an industry that we want to see in the future.
I do agree with you. And when we were talking, there's this film that it was alleged that the African that was used, that made the whole film what it was paid like a very measly fee, and the movie made a lot of money in the box office. So the question now becomes, what happens when you're giving contracts and the clauses that would be unfair to you do not pay them? So what are those clauses that you feel writers, directors, actors should pay attention to so that they're able to protect their back-end participation and also give their heirs and successors in title the opportunity to be able to benefit from their creativity that, builds a particular generation.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if this is the film you're talking about, but is it Gods Must Be Crazy?
Yeah, that's it.
There we go. Yeah,
Yeah, that's it.
that was a
It's like
big,
I
big
think
film.
like story that is being circulated in the film sector for awareness. I do understand that contract and rest of that, but yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no, that was a very painful situation. There's a couple of clauses that show up or don't show up in contracts that actors and other filmmakers really need to look out for. First off, since we're talking about royalties, obviously back-end participation clauses, right? How are profits going to be handled? How is licensing going to be handled? Are there sequels? Are there spin-offs? How is distribution going to be handled? How is the IP going to be utilized after the film is released? These things need to, be made clear to the people that are making the film, to avoid the incident that happened with Glee and The Gods Must Be Crazy. You also need something called audit rights, and audit rights sort of slot perfectly into the story of royalties. So the way royalties work is you get a percentage or a share of the financial success of a film as the film lives out its financial life, as it's distributed and people are engaging with it and so on and so forth. So you need to know how much the film is making. You need to be able to audit the film. And a lot of people will sign a royalty agreement without audit rights, which means you have to just trust whatever you're being told the film is making. And it could be understated, and there's nothing you can do about that unless you have that clause. There's also reversion clauses, which revert IP rights back to the originators of the IP after a certain period of time. There's things like credit protection. Are your credits going to be protected throughout the lifetime of this film? So, for example, if a spin-off is made and I'm the writer who created these characters, am I going to be credited in the spin-off as based on characters created by? That's just an example. We already talked about sequels. I think I've covered quite a few things. Territory, language rights, translation rights. There's a lot of things.
So I think I understand why a lot of people just skim through the pages and just whatever it is the same, because you basically just have to take time to dot your I's and cross your T's. But you did mention reversion rights, and I think that is not something that is so common or popular within Africa and also dare say Nigeria, because there's this movie that Tom Cruise had done. I think they had gotten the right to, create a film out of a newspaper publication that was made. And there was a 35-year timeline that after once it gets to 35 years, we're going to revert the right back to the author and maybe his children if he's dead. And interestingly, the 35 years hits 2020. 2020 was the year we were all in lockdown. No movies in the theaters and stuff like that. So they had paused premiering that movie until post the lockdown, and the estate sued Tom Cruise and the rest of the producers. And so if that was an African scenario now, how would you advise, say, a younger creative as an actor who has the opportunity to work with an A-list actor like Tom Cruise for such a movie? Would you say consider things like lockdown, since we have experienced it? If that happens and the reversion time comes, then what then happens to the close? Is there I don't know, what's the solution if that happens? Does it automatically revert, or you wait until they've exhausted the commercial rights that they were given to exploit that work in question?
That's an interesting question. I'm not really a lawyer, but I am familiar with some aspects of reversion clauses. So I do know that there's 3 scenarios in which rights can be reverted. So there's a certain number of years, which you mentioned. There's inactivity as well, which is basically related to the third one, which is failure to exploit the IP. So essentially, if you give your IP to a studio and then they go a certain amount of time without utilizing it, you can then take it back. This tends to be exploited by some studios. I think we saw it with Marvel, for example, where a studio would just make a film once in a blue moon just to keep the rights. Eventually, they got all their rights back, so good for them. But yeah, those are the things that you need to consider. And in a situation where things go thoroughly wrong for the studio and they need to postpone, et cetera, that's why you have that clause in there. That clause needs to be exhaustive. That clause needs to talk about, regardless of A, B, C, or D, the parameters that determine whether or not the rights revert back to the IP owner or the IP originator are so and so. If it's a number of years and that is what we're working with, it does not matter if part of the earth explodes. If the IP owner or their descendants are alive, then after 10 years, give it back, regardless of what is going on. So it's perfectly possible to protect yourself thoroughly using legal documents. You just need to know that you have that capability. Though, let's land back into the realm of reality, where as an African filmmaker, right, the likelihood that you're going to be able to afford the legal aid it's going to take on a studio the size of Warner Brothers or the size of Marvel Studios is fairly low, right? So we need certain structures, certain cooperative structures to protect each other in cases where something like this happens.
So moving on from that conversation, right, and picking back to the fact that you mentioned IP. IP is my thing, and IP is in film, right? Now let's look at it from the streamer's perspective, where they want to come and invest, because everybody wants to take a piece of Africa, but don't want to put in the groundwork. So how would you advise that filmmakers should protect themselves when the streamers come in? So do you think the streamers coming in now is like a good thing for the film sector? And what are those available African licensing deals that you would advise or you've seen that were good, and the ones that were bad that make you rethink and say, okay, I think we need to sit down as a continent and come up with our own structure that will solve our streaming issues within our continent?
When it comes to streaming platforms, as with everything, there's advantages and there's disadvantages to them focusing on Africa. The obvious advantages, of course, are visibility of your content. The distribution of your content is going to be much higher. People aren't really going to theaters all that much. The fact of the matter is these streaming platforms are available to audiences, so they're probably going to be looking for content on those streaming platforms. So if you work with them, the chances of your content being seen by audiences gets higher, and international discovery gets higher. And of course, there's the issue of legitimacy. African stories are absolutely amazing, but there is a legitimacy that does come with working with these gigantic corporations or these gigantic streamers that tells other funders that you are a legitimate filmmaker, you are capable of delivering a product effectively. Now, there's things that also got worse with their arrival, right? So for example, where even though it didn't happen often, but it was possible to negotiate things like royalties, buyouts are now a lot more common. And this happens because for streamers, it's a lot more efficient and less risky and less, legally and financially problematic to just buy the rights of a film or buy a film outright and then showcase it on the streaming platform. Streaming platforms also tend to be very cagey around data, so they're very opaque about the performance of your film. So one thing that tends to help with getting more money to make more films is showing people how many people engaged with your film, how many people watched it. But if you're working with Netflix, the chances of them telling you that is extremely low. Creators in Africa also struggle with the issue of leverage. We don't have a lot of leverage compared to these powerful organizations because a lot of us work as individuals when we're working with these streaming platforms. And when you're just one person versus $1 billion company, you don't have the leverage to negotiate a deal that will actually benefit you in the long run. And finally, when it comes to audience relationships, now your film isn't just a film by Zen Issa. It's a Netflix film. So it's Netflix that is now taking advantage of that relationship. So those are the advantages and disadvantages of streaming platforms coming. You had another part to your question where I think you asked, what can filmmakers do in order to protect themselves? Well, we need stronger union structures within territories and across the continent that will be able to fight for standardized contracts that actually benefit the filmmakers. We need educational facilities that don't just talk about the art of filmmaking. We need to start talking about the business of filmmaking and the legal side. We need to start educating filmmakers on what they need to do to protect themselves. And we need to start leaving the idea of, legacy colonial economics, this idea of, we're just exporting the raw materials of film. We're exporting our cultures, we're exporting our music. We need to find a way to keep the money circulating within our industries instead of just hemorrhaging our cultural and artistic benefits to the rest of the world.
Don't you think that is tied to, the bragging rights that one will get from saying, oh, I've worked with the likes of Netflix and Amazon? Does it basically open doors for you? And how would you rate film guilds within Africa based on the countries that you've been able to work with and, produce your film and advocate? You made mention about legacy, colonial, something, and I was like, I think I'm going to enter the film economic class with you.
Okay.
Yeah. So what do you really think? I mean, everyone is excited. I mean, there was a story that Netflix had left Nigeria, and I think there was a bit of a panic. Right. But looking at how investment is focused on certain geographical areas within Africa, would you say working with these streaming platforms now gives you a bragging right within your territory, and does it open doors for more investments and opportunity? And how would an individual filmmaker that is not backed by anybody in whatever capacity, be able to maneuver all of these conversations?
Working with a giant streamer definitely gives you sort of like a badge of legitimacy. It legitimizes you in the industry because they have minimum standards. And if you're capable of surpassing those standards and actually getting your content distributed by a streaming platform, that means you're probably a pretty good filmmaker, right? And you want that when you're then approaching other funders, because they just want assurance that you're not a risky bet and you actually know what you're doing. So, absolutely, fair enough. Like I said, there's advantages to working with these streaming platforms. And that's one of them. You get a lot of legitimacy and a lot more opportunity. You also asked about my experiences with the different guilds and, all of the organizations that exist throughout my travels. I'd say they're sincerely doing the best with what they have, right? But what they have tends to not be a lot. They need a lot more buy-in from filmmakers. We need to be part of them because a guild is only as strong as its members. They need a lot more buy-in from governments and, parallel organizations that handle things like, IP ownership, et cetera, legal organizations as well. But that is starting to happen. There's sort of a trend in the countries that I've traveled to where film is slowly being regarded more and more as a legitimate industry that can generate benefits to economies, instead of just like a hobby that some people take too seriously. So sentiments are changing around film, and as such, guilds are actually gaining a bit more traction. We need to accelerate that. We need to get more involved with our local guilds and study other guilds and how they're working. Study Nigeria, study South Africa, our most successful film industries on the continent, and get an understanding of what it is they're doing in order to protect their actors. Because we're more likely to get similar context from African countries than we are from American or Indian industries.
So understand that there's this quest or need for African original content, but we also need to draw a line when it comes to what kind of content are we putting out there? Are we giving out too much information about our heritage? Because cultural heritage is a thing now. Everybody's talking about cultural heritage. But from the African perspective, it's like it's being commodified, and there's this trend of wanting to monopolize it for a particular location that is not African. So when you go to negotiate with these streamers, how do you ensure that you protect the cultural heritage while still retaining the originality to your film content? And what rights do you typically give up as a filmmaker? Which one do you keep? And do the current financing model that we have now within the African continent, is it feasible, especially in relation to IP creation, right? Because IP basically is you having like a long-term investment for your film. So what are those things that you need to consider during the negotiation stage so you don't lose the communal heritage that your people should enjoy as a continent first, as a country, and also as a community, but still trying to market us and put us in a good light out there?
There is a reason these streaming platforms are targeting Africa. Like you said, we have a rich, like well of creative
Oh,
resources to dig from. And these are
yeah.
the colonial legacy economics I was talking about. The idea that all we do is just produce for everybody else, but it's not about us here in Africa.
Mm.
So when it comes to filmmaking, I always tell filmmakers it's not always about adapting your story for the sake of international audiences. You will find that international audiences will still retain interest even if you target your stories towards local industries, towards local audiences, I mean. And it's good to cultivate a culture within filmmaking of making films for us and then generating an audience within Africa because that keeps the leverage on the continent. We're not just trying to appease someone else. When it comes to rights, IP for me is still the biggest one, right? We give up IP way too easily. We don't value the capabilities that we gain from retaining IP in the long term, or even from a reversion of IP. So we need to start really considering things like not surrendering ownership, licensing ownership instead, right? Not just giving it away, but licensing it. And there's a little trick that I actually learned from, I think it's Charlize Theron who was talking about this. She's South African. I think you know Charlize Theron, yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah,
She has a
right.
new movie on Netflix, and I think it's called Apex. I started watching it, but I'm not done yet. Not doing an advert anyway, but yeah, carry on, please.
Yeah. She was talking to a filmmaker in South Africa and she was telling him, if you want to retain your IP, make something that's not a film that has your characters first, and then adapt your film based on that so that Netflix can feel comfortable licensing it and utilizing it, et cetera, et cetera. But then you retain the IP because the IP is related, for example, to a book. So now for the films I'm making, the projects that I want to make, I'm writing books first and
Yeah.
then getting those, published as my IP. And then I'm basing my stories on the books that I retain ownership of my IP, even if they
Wow.
take control of the film. So it's like these little tips and tricks that you need to utilize, but it only works when you see IP for the value that it actually has. Then from IP, there's a waterfall of things. Remake rights, publishing rights. Where can they publish? Can they publish globally? You need to know that. If there's a
Mm.
specific territory that they can publish in, then that means that they need to reconsult you if they want to publish in another one. Sequel rights, non-exclusive theatrical rights. There's like this list of things that you need to go through, but it starts at an appreciation for all of the legalities that can protect you if you just know about them and you go out there and you actually research them.
I think you just gave us a very big piece of advice in terms of, the business of film. You need to have the foundation that gives you full control so you can monetize it till wherever. And
Yeah.
mind blown, right? Kind of. I mean, I don't know. Are you a fan of Bridgerton? Because I'm not saying I'm obsessed, but the recent season 4, I'm actually impressed with how they were able to like build not just on the characters but also the podcasters. But when I saw the podcast episode, as a podcaster, I was really excited about it because it wasn't something I'd seen most filmmakers consider. And also, the author of that book is making loads of money from every scene and episodes and all the merchandising that comes with it. But still talking about ownership now, investors will give you money, right? And they want 80 to 100% ownership now. How are you able to ensure that you do not give out, like you said, we give out our IP too easily in Africa? So how do we change the narrative when looking for investors, whether locally, internationally, or regionally? How do we change the mindset when it comes to IP ownership of the various media formats that you build from either a story, from a book, or the adaptations, from a film? Is there like a preferred module for financiers to get their return? And how do creatives, again, the filmmakers, the actors, how do everybody keep their royalties within the continent? How are we going to actually achieve that?
Seriously, if you want to transform your IP knowledge from to come and hang out with us on the IP Series podcast. We're here to inspire, to educate, and entertain you on your journey to understanding how intangible asset works. So subscribe today and let's make IP the most interesting conversation. Else, we're gonna have a problem, guys. Please subscribe, okay? Hit that subscribe button and join the party.
Okay, so when it comes to financiers and their goals and then balancing the entire goals, financiers want money, right? They're investing in your film as a vehicle to get more money out of it. It's a company to them, basically. And we need to start thinking of our films as that, as companies. There's an acronym called SPV, Special Purpose Vehicle. You literally register a company in order to make your films, like a temporary company that you make, and then there's shares, et cetera, et cetera. So what you want as a filmmaker is to make sure that the financiers feel like they can get their returns, while you, as a creative, get to keep ownership and things like royalties. So there's smarter structures that we can start employing. One is something called a revenue waterfall. The basic idea is investors have a set amount that they want to recoup. So they invest 10 million into your film. They want to recoup like 50%, or they want to recoup 100%, whatever percentage they want to make. They recoup that first. So they are consuming the revenue that is coming from the film first. But then afterwards, profits, they then start splitting between the other people that are below them on the waterfall. That's why it's called a waterfall. Water starts at the top, the investors are getting the money, then producers, then creators. So you're assuring them that they're going to get money, but you're also ensuring your long-term participation in the money that's coming from the project. There's also limited term licenses. So instead of, hey, I'm selling you this thing, you own it forever. No, you license it to them for a limited amount of time, and they can, do what you like. But ultimately, it's going to come back to me, right? There's equity participation that you could negotiate as well. So instead of just fees, you can receive equity in the project. So that means part ownership of the project. And I say instead of pure fees because please still try to get something upfront, because a lot of these things, this is the long game that we're playing here. This is 10, 15 years of this project, living out its financial life. So if you are somebody who might be struggling financially in the now, it's good to negotiate both fees and this equity participation or royalty participation. You can also utilize things like public film funds, but this now starts to fall onto governments and negotiations with guilds and organizations that represent filmmakers. Systems like in Europe, they will utilize tax incentives, which we're starting to see on the continent. I know Zimbabwe has introduced a 200% tax rebate on film equipment. I know. You're basically making money from buying film equipment. South Africa, I'm not sure about the state of their tax incentive right now. I wrote a post about it on LinkedIn. It's still in flux, but there's tax incentives that are being processed that are in the mix. There's grants, there's cultural funds that can be created for filmmakers. South Africa, I know very famously, they have I think they call it NFVF. I hope I got that right. But they have, publicly funded grants that can help filmmakers make films. So, these are the models that we can start to utilize. You were talking about back in the 80s. Back in the 80s, especially in Zimbabwe, film funds are what used to fund, Zimbabwean films. And then it moved to NGOs, and now it's like private ownership and foreign incentives. If we start moving back to, this idea of public film funds, it could be extremely helpful to filmmakers as well. Yeah, and finally, there's sorry, I think it's called slate financing. Slate financing. Okay. You are making multiple productions simultaneously, basically, if that makes sense. So instead of just investing in one film, you're investing in several films. And then this reduces risk across all of the films because something is going to succeed. So, it's this sort of idea. Yeah.
That's interesting. So I know that conversation is focused primarily on who gets paid when the camera stops rolling, right? There are other minute people that make the film sector work, like the post-production, the costumer, the sync manager, insurance, and the rest of them. Now, tying this back to backend royalty, how are you able to get the revenue from all of these contributors sum up into a lump sum and determine who are the people that should actually receive this funding? Do we rely on the standard Hollywood format, or do we come up with our own format that would work for Africa or the regional or country-based film sector? And are there barriers that you think would not allow this model to actually work for us if we do intend to? I mean, because I think the more we see archival movies from the 80s, 90s, you start getting inspired, you start asking questions. What did they not do right, and what can we do better now so that everyone who is at this stage and when they get to their stage is able to get like a back-end royalty? So what is back-end royalty to you as a filmmaker that's currently touring Africa and has refused to put Nigeria in your list for this year?
Hey, I'm definitely coming to Nigeria. I have. Well, it gets complicated when you start thinking about above the line versus below the line, because of how creativity is regarded. So much of our idea of how a film is made is born from Hollywood, right? Which is why we have this very like class-based division of who's getting what. So you have above the line, your directors, your producers, your writers, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have below the line, which is the people you're talking about. You need carpenters in order to build your sets. It's not just the heads of department. There's people within those departments that are working very hard. And traditionally, those people get paid salaries, or they get paid a certain amount, which is exactly what actors and them are complaining about. And the justification for that tends to be creative contribution, right? The people above the line are seen as people who are contributing creatively to the creation of the IP. Hence, they should be compensated continuously, and so on and so forth. Should we come up with a different system in order to compensate filmmakers here? I think absolutely. But I, as an individual, because I'm a director, right? I'm a writer-director. I, as an individual, do not have the capacity to tell people what it is they need. For all I know, the carpenters want nothing to do with royalties. They want their money right there and then. They don't want promises or future things. I haven't spoken to them, so I can't really speak to that. But that, again, ties back to this idea of the existence of guilds, the existence of organizations that speak for these people because these people are part of those organizations. So if we have these organizations throughout, then they can come together and go, no, the system that works for Africa, because of the specific context of Congo, is A, B, C, D. We need to pay royalties, we need to pay this, we need to do that, we need to do this. This is what our people are saying. So I want to put the ability to determine what system we are creating in the hands of the people participating in this system, instead of us just inheriting a system that was created and worked for those people in the 60s or 40s, whenever they created it. We're here today, we're not in America, we're in Africa, and we need to create systems for ourselves.
I totally agree. I think that also applies to our laws. There's a lot of copy modeling that are not specifically tailored for our environment. Now I'm going to go into the next bit, not like the highlight, but it's like the big elephant in the room. And I think when that happened, everybody was on LinkedIn, on X, in the industry, was like, what's going on? Showmax, right? What happened to Showmax? I mean, there was a huge market. There was a huge market waiting for Showmax. But now Showmax is no longer there. So what do? Do we fall back to the foreigners? Do we restructure? Do we depend on the government? For those who may not have been tracking this or following the conversation, what do you think in terms of restructuring, governance, putting in policies? What are those questions we need to ask going forward to create our own streaming platforms that can carry our own local content and also encourage local filmmakers to want to invest and create like a huge IP catalog like the Marvel Studios that we currently know and follow in terms of franchising and the rest of them? what can we do differently? And what would you say will happen to, or what do you think basically will happen to all the content catalog that Showmax has? Are they going to license it out? Are they going to phase it out? What happens to the contributor? And it also ties back to the residual royalties and backend royalties we're talking about. If somebody decides to buy the catalog, how will the contributors get paid if there's a spin-off, if there's a sequel, an adaptation to, say, a video game or a stage play? What are those things that we need to be asking? What are the gaps that, Showmax living the industry has, shown us today?
Yeah, the Showmax situation was tough to watch because they invested so much in African originals, but they were doing so at a massive loss, right? For every dollar they were earning, they were losing about $2.50, and that's between I think 2023 and 2025. So that's a serious loss that they were running at. And Canal Plus, which is a French company, came through and they basically bought it up and restructured. And now all of us as filmmakers are uncertain about things like licensing continuity, about what's happening to the archive, as you mentioned, about, where is this content going to live, essentially? I saw something recently that said that we can still access Showmax shows on the DSTV streaming platform, which, Canal Plus,
Yeah.
But I think this taught us that just because something is digital doesn't mean it's automatically permanent. And we need to start asking questions about what it is about Showmax that led to its demise. Why wasn't it profitable enough to survive on African content marketed towards African people? And there's a couple of reasons for that. They didn't have a lot of subscriptions. They depended on things like mobile data, which is fairly expensive in most places. They were targeting multiple markets, which is essentially a monolith of content. Because, Africa isn't one country, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of countries, a lot of cultures within each country. So I don't think they accounted for that in their strategy. Exactly. And with high production costs and the expense of the tech infrastructure, that obviously led to serious issues. So when it comes to where are we going to be able to access it, Canal Plus is making a plan via DSTV in order for us to be able to, view the catalog, which is cool, but then it doesn't sit right with me that it's a French company that is now distributing African content to Africans. And I think it fell down to issues around the ability to make their content available to Africans and also relatable enough to individual territories by respecting the differences between, because we have something in common across Africa. We have a lot of things in common, but those differences need to be respected in the content that we're marketing in order to ensure survivability of a platform like Showmax. Hopefully we see something like Showmax come up again with better strategizing, with better respect across all cultural sectors. And we see a movement within the industries surrounding streaming, industries like mobile data, industries like Wi-Fi. We see infrastructural improvements across the continent to make availability greater to Africans, especially those in remote areas, because there's a lot of them and they're very hungry for content. So those are the things that we need to be adjusting in order to, ensure that something like this doesn't happen again.
I mean, it's a very sad situation, but like you said, they have to ease into, if the next person coming up with a streaming platform for Africa has to ease into the territory. You need to understand the territory. I mean, there's so many compliance requirements, regulatory requirements, audience feedback, getting the right data to ensure that you get government buy-in, private sector buy-in, and then dealing with the telecom companies as well and all the other issues that may have arisen in the course of Showmax going out of business. Now, you said just because something is digital doesn't mean it's permanent. I didn't want to ask this question before, but because you made this statement, I want to ask you. There's so much conversation going on around adoption of AI in the creative sector. Do you think that is a good thing for the film sector? Or do you think it's a bad thing or an opportunity for those who couldn't get our African resources would, go through the back door of using an AI company to train their models and get what they really want? Or do you think it's still going to lack that authenticity of an original African cultural heritage content?
That's a very good question. And it's a debate that I've had with my mentors over and over again. I think, like everything else, AI has good sides, bad sides. The good sides, let's start with that, are making it easier for Africans to create content, making it cheaper, right? You don't need a giant stage in order to make a set piece like Avengers Endgame anymore. You can use AI to do that. A couple of $1,000s, some prompters, etc., etc. So that's great. That's wonderful. And then of course you have the negative sides, which are number one, when it comes to ownership of the things that AI generates, but not acknowledging where AI is drawing from. There's a lot of artists whose data and whose art is being skimmed through in order to create the things that we're creating using AI. They don't receive any compensation for that. So it definitely feels like that needs to be addressed. That is an area of ownership, of IP ownership that needs to be addressed. There's also, which then leads into when you make something with AI, can you actually own it? Because you didn't compensate the people that owned the data that was skimmed in order to create it. So is it yours? And that's an issue we're still fighting over worldwide. And then, of course, there's the issue of jobs, right? Our film industry is like across Africa, a lot of film industries are in a stage of development where they're extremely vulnerable to the loss of jobs that comes with the introduction of AI. I just said just now that you don't need a giant studio lot in order to make a set piece like Avengers Endgame. What I didn't mention is that studio lot is built. There's builders who make that. There's carpenters who make that. There's people who set it up. These people are being paid. These people are making a living. They have families that they need to feed. And with the advent of AI and it gaining more and more popularity, these people are not going to be getting jobs as much anymore, if at all. The unfortunate thing is AI is here. It doesn't seem to be going away at any point. The job loss is coming. I think the best thing that we can do as Africans is adapt around AI and utilize it as a tool, not as the entire film production. So instead of us generating the whole film using AI, I think that there is space for us to segment into jobs specific aspects of AI. Granted, the writer can be assisted with AI when it comes to script writing, but we should set a threshold for what is regarded a work of AI and what is regarded as a collaboration with AI, what is regarded as sparing contribution by AI. A cinematographer can use AI to simulate a shot. The carpenters I was talking about will likely not have any proper recourse, but they can adapt, and maybe new careers will start to emerge that are based around AI. Instead of lighting using actual lights, you can light using AI. There's many routes that can be taken that can actually protect us. They won't protect us fully. This is going to be hard. It's going to be a difficult time. But like I said, it's here and we need to make do with the best that we can make do with.
I totally agree. And I don't know if you've seen the recent Oscar rule where they are saying to crack down AI, actors can get multiple nominations in same category and international film eligibility requirement now. So, I think everybody's now sitting up because the demand for original content is still there. There are people who still believe art should be preserved as it is, where there's more of the human contribution than artificial contribution to a creative work. And also, I don't know if you've also seen the news of some film companies letting go staffs in thousands because of AI. Right? And then Africans are celebrating AI, saying it's making my job easier. Really, guys? What about talked about who have family to take care of? Okay.
Yeah.
So I do agree with you. The conversation, we need to have like a proper African template when it comes to adoption of AI within not just the film sector, but every other creative sector. So we'll be rounding up in a bit. But I wanted to get your feedback as to what you think the African film sector can do to build a fairer compensation system for creatives. One that is grounded in standardized contract with residual clauses, collecting society or collective management organizations, rule, transparency, and the rest of them that are government-backed, that have strong IP enforcement and transparent revenue reporting from everyone trying to build the sector.
Yeah, I think all of what you mentioned, absolutely. We
So you're
need
saying I answered my question.
we need to do it. You really did. But yeah, essentially, standardized contracts, transparent streaming reporting, IP enforcement. But another thing is education. You know, film education needs to include business. It needs to include the legal side of filmmaking. It needs to include education when it comes to IP. We tend to focus deeply and effectively on directing, cinematography, editing, production design, sound design. This is cool. This is all great stuff. But if we don't know IP law, if we don't know how royalties work or what they are, if we don't have like a proper understanding of finance, of how films are financed, how films make money, and we don't teach negotiation is a big skill. If we don't teach these things, then we are setting up our future filmmakers for failure. So we need to include this in education for film. We need to start creating platforms like this one, like this podcast that you have, where people can watch and they can gain, a greater understanding of how these things work, and they can really protect themselves. So, good job. You're part of the solution.
Thank you. Okay, so last question. It's a two-in-one question, right? Film distribution and piracy in Africa. As a filmmaker, what has been your experience like? Do you think that also affects the conversations as to backend payment, residual royalties? And what are those trends? Any trend that you've seen within the last 5 years that you feel will be different in the next 5 years within the African film sector?
Piracy is a big, big issue. Obviously, on the surface, you're looking at piracy, and the biggest issues that you're going to be facing are, filmmakers can't make money from piracy. People are basically, essentially stealing your content, and it's quite prevalent in Africa because a lot of people don't have the financial means to afford to watch certain content. The pricing that we need to use in order to make a profit conflicts directly with the living that people are making. So a lot of people will pirate content in order to watch it. And it's quite crippling, to be absolutely honest with you. But I do have a very controversial take on piracy. I think we need to figure out a way to integrate the reality of piracy into our strategies as African filmmakers. I'll give you an example. You know about Adobe Premiere Pro, Adobe, the suite that people use to edit After Effects, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if this is official, but from my experience, what I've been studying, it seems piracy is a part of their strategy, because by having a lot of informal creators utilize pirated versions of Premiere Pro, they have found a way to make themselves the standard for creating, certain art. So as their licensing capabilities get stronger, and as you, as a filmmaker, then get into official positions, you're more likely, because all you know is Premiere Pro. From the time you had no money, that's all you were using. You were using a pirated version. Now you are in an actual studio. Now you're actually in an official capacity. You can't use a pirated version. That's illegal. The company you're working for could get sued. So now you actually need to encourage your company to buy Premiere Pro, or you need to buy Premiere Pro. You need to buy the Adobe suite. So in that way, they have sort of integrated the reality of their software being pirated to make themselves an industry standard when it comes to pirates. So I tend to think things like the way Game of Thrones infiltrated Zimbabwe, it was largely pirated. Nobody was paying for HBO Plus. I don't think it was even available.
I have an experience with this Game of Thrones series, right? When it started, I had a friend then, and he was in the UK, and he goes, "Oh, I'm recommending this series." And I go, "Okay, cool." And then I was like, I'm now in season 5. And it was just in season 1. And he goes, "Season 5? But still season 1, where did you get season 5? I just had to stop. I was a bit younger then. I just had to stop
Yeah.
buying the CDs and wait until GOT finished, and I sat and I watched 1 to 8 and I enjoyed it better. But I do agree with what you were saying as to, ease into the market and access and the rest of them. There's also a theory regarding Microsoft using the same formula. You want to be the standard so there's no rival competition. So you don't try to enforce, but you know that there are certain corporations and entities that if they are actually going to do like huge work, they have to buy the licensed products. But yeah, please continue.
Yeah. So similarly, I think
Yeah.
a lot of film popularity now is very social media based. So a person might not have the money to pay to watch your film, and they might
Yeah.
pirate it. But if they're going to talk about it, they're going to do what happened to you, where they recommend it, right? They're talking to other people. They're like, hey, man, have you watched this film? And if I have the money to watch the film, there's a greater chance that I will pay for it and I'll actually watch it properly. But that comes from the word of mouth that is birthed by piracy. So I think if we acknowledge that this is something that is happening, until we can control it, until we can stop it in its tracks and go, hey, no more piracy is over, we can still utilize it as a means to ricochet our reputation. The same way Netflix would ricochet our reputation, get as many people's eyes on the things that we are creating, get our names in people's mouths, so that when we are moving on to finance better things, or when piracy becomes a thing of the past, you've already benefited from this thing that was supposed to be hurting you. I think in the future, we're going to see global streamers pulling back from their aggressive push into African commissioning.
That would be nice.
They're probably going to try and just start buying the content outright. We're going to see a rise in hybrid financing as knowledge goes up. Places like brands, organizations, governments, even YouTube, ecosystems and fan-based ecosystems are going to be serious means of financing. We're going to see more creator-owned distribution, so people can distribute on their own using platforms like YouTube. They can monetize their own communities using Patreon or any other monetization communities. And we're going to start seeing more collaboration across countries, which is why I'm traveling right now. We're going to see Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, Zimbabwe, all collaborating in order to make a production. AI is definitely going to lower production costs, but there's going to be a lot of job cuts because of AI. And then finally, the most important thing, as people get more educated, as people learn more, is going to be IP. People are going to be very serious about their IP, and they're not going to be playing around because they see the value of it in the future.
That sounds like a street business strategy that you would want to adopt as a filmmaker based within Africa. So I think we should consider that for policy making purpose anyway.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. So this episode is basically like a special series in celebration of the 6th anniversary of the IP Series podcast. I don't know if you have any final comments regarding our conversations, and tell us how we can reach you to further. I mean, I know how I can reach you, right? But how can some other person listening to you from any part of the world who wants to get into business? And for Nigerians, on behalf of myself and others, who will be waiting for the day you post and say, finally, guys, I'm in Nigeria, let's meet.
Oh, that time is coming. My closing thought. I think Africa is entering a time of great flux with their stories. And we're going to be seeing a lot of undeniable global value. However, our ownership systems, they're not developed enough yet. And we need to enter this battle, this movement of developing our ownership systems and joining these guilds, joining together and speaking with a single voice when it comes to the things that we want to see from international communities and from our local communities as well. Our films can travel globally, right? Our films can be exported and can be watched by everybody. But the question we need to start asking is, who's going to benefit from that? Is it going to be them or is it going to be us?
Thank you so much for that. Because, most times when you're talking to me, you just keep dropping things. I'm like, I should have said this. I should have asked you this. Final question. Because you also did not tell us how we can reach you. So I'll use it as my final question. So you talked about fan base. And I feel like when you're talking about fan base within the film sector, I don't think we have like a proper fan base community where you say you have people that are dedicated to a particular production company or actors or actress. What you rather see online is people bouncing back and forth. But if the film sector wants to put out like a merchandise product, are you sure that the 100K likes you got and the million impression you got will be able to afford what you actually put out there? And then also in reference to IP-backed financing, do you think our film can be used as collateral in future to help filmmakers not rely so much on the investors and the streamers who all just want a piece of Africa without giving us so much control or governance vote when it comes to how our film contents are being considered and for cultural preservation as well? Do not forget to tell us how to reach out to you. Don't forget that.
Sure. To answer your question, those two things are very intermingled. Fan base and audience engagement will give us the leverage we need in order to, negotiate these deals with these organizations, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for eyes, they're looking for money. In terms of getting fans that are going to financially engage with what you're creating, fans are happy to financially engage. I've seen so many children who have a Spider-Man backpack or an Incredible Hulk t-shirt, right? So clearly, we are willing to engage, but we engage with the familiar, we engage with the visible, we engage with things that mean something to us. So filmmakers need to go beyond the launch of a film. They need to start really focusing on the branding of a film, the branding of the individual actors in a film. There's a reason why before Spider-Man even starts filming, you will see hundreds of interviews, so many, creator collaborations with Tom Holland and this guy and that guy, utilizing and like applying to his audience. So when Spider-Man finally does come out, there's an air of familiarity that you have with the main actor that gives you a need to interact with this character. So we need to start creating systems when we are thinking of films and marketing them that are very creative about how we market. We want to go into these communities. We want these communities to engage with our content and to feel and identify with it to the point where they're willing to put their money where their mouth is. And that will then give us leverage when it comes to negotiating with our IP, because the value of your IP is very much in your audience. I have this audience. This audience will interact with merchandise, et cetera, so you will make your money back. So let's negotiate what I'm going to make. Let's negotiate what you're going to make. As opposed to, hey, I have a film, please buy it. Those are two very different conversations. In terms of where to reach me, do you have another question? Last.
No, I thought you were going to skip that. So I want to say you haven't told us how we can reach out to you, but glad that you
You can reach me on LinkedIn. It's Takunda Aaron Chimtashu. So Takunda. Then Aaron is AARON. And then Chimutashu is CHIMUTASHU. You can also find me on my website, takundachimutashu.com. Just hit me up. You can hit me up with a DM. You can connect. You can follow. I love to engage with people who love to engage with me. So hit me up. I'm available.
Thank you so much, Takunda. It seems you're a Spider-Man fan because you mentioned Tom Holland, who's the husband of one of our favorite actors, child actor who is now, an adult actor, right?
Oh, yes,
and the recent Spider-Man brand new day trailer had 1.1 billion views. And that was in March. I think that was like the highest ever. So when you mentioned it, I was like, this is another Spider-Verse, fan out there, which is why he alluded to it. But thank you so much for an interesting conversation today and for also contributing to the 6th anniversary of IP Series podcast. Super grateful to you. And we've come to the end of our podcast recording. Thank you
so much for having me. Really
thank you.
Thank you for listening to IP Series Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to share it with your friends, family, and colleagues. You can also follow us on Instagram at IP Series with Esmeraldo ESQ or Twitter at IP Series 1 or send us an email to ipseriesinfo@gmail.com. Until next time, stay tuned and stay informed.